Days after becoming the first nation to land a craft near the moon's largely unexplored South Pole, India is all set to achieve another space exploration milestone. The Aditya L1 is the first Indian space mission to study the sun. Here's more on the mission and the Indian space program. The spacecraft will be placed in an orbit around the Lagrangian point 1 of the Sun-Earth system, about 1.5 million kilometers from Earth, where the gravitational effects of both bodies cancel each other out. That parking lot is in space allows objects to stay put because of balancing gravitational forces. The Aditya L1 will have a continuous clear view of the sun. As per Indian Space Agency ISRO, the mission will help observe solar activities and effects on space weather in real time. The spacecraft will be carrying 7 payloads to observe the sun's outermost layers known as the photosphere and the chromosphere, including by using electromagnetic and particle field detectors. Now, among several objectives, it will study the drivers for space weather, including a better understanding of the dynamics of solar wind. While NASA and the European Space Agency have previously placed orbiters to study the sun, it will be the first such mission for India. Now let's talk about India's space program. The unmanned Chandrayaan-3, meaning mooncraft in Sanskrit, touched down on the lunar surface on August 23rd. It marks the latest milestone in India's ambitious space program, sparking celebrations across the world's largest democracy. Remember, only 4 nations have landed successfully on the moon. That is India, Russia, the United States, and China. India's space program has grown considerably in size and momentum since the nation first sent a probe to orbit the moon in 2008. In 2014, India became the first Asian nation to put a craft into orbit around Mars. The country is slated to launch a 3-day crewed mission into the Earth's orbit by next year. There are plans for a joint mission with Japan to send another probe to the moon by 2025. India is aiming for an orbital mission to Venus within the next 2 years. Dr. Amitabh Ghosh is a scientist at NASA and is now joining us live from Washington, D.C. Dr. Amitabh, good to see you again. How is ISRO's Aditya L1 different from NASA's Parker Solar Probe or the ESA's Solar Orbiter?
Well, there are a lot of differences. So as you mentioned, that Aditya is going to be parked at Lagrange point 1, which is about 1 million miles away from Earth, and that is going to be its vantage point to observe the sun. On the other hand, the Parker probe is headed towards the sun. So the distance from Aditya to the sun will be like 1 astronomical units, which is, I think, so it's going to be 100 million miles plus. Mm-hmm. So for the solar Parker probe, its distance is going to be much closer, maybe 4 to 7 million miles from the sun. So it's very close. It's going to almost pass through the atmosphere of the sun. The electronics on the Parker probe is going to be very sophisticated, and the insulation will be very sophisticated, but because it will pass through temperatures of 1300 degrees centigrade. To give you a context, that is the temperature at which steel melts. So it's going to be exceedingly difficult. And the other thing about the solar Parker probe is that it will be the highest velocity in terms of what a spacecraft could achieve. Right. The velocity is going to be, maybe, I don't recall off the top of the head, but about 500,000 miles per hour, which is perhaps, so I might be getting this slightly wrong, but that's probably about 50 times or 80 times the velocity of a commercial airliner. So it's going to go very fast through the, and so it's going to sample the solar dust. But every mission has its own objective, and gets its different types of data. Mm-hmm. And NASA and ESA have other probes, including stereo, and there's a lot of action. So one interesting thing is, why are all these nations sending all these probes to the sun?
Right. We'll be talking about that shortly, Doctor. Just before we move on with the rest of the questions, I just want to get a clarification from you. We keep on saying Lagrange or Lagrangian point. Probably briefly, you can explain the significance of this point.
Right. It's a Lagrange point, and I think there are multiple Lagrange points. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 at least. And so it's essentially what you said is right. The velocity of the Earth, the gravitation force of the Earth and the Sun cancels out. Doesn't mean there's not going to be any gravitation force from other bodies, but Lagrange point is defined between primarily two bodies, and so the point where the gravitation force cancels out. So there are Lagrange points between Earth and Mars, for example, or Earth and Venus, or Sun and Mars. So it's the definition between 2 points, but there is always the third point. So or multiple points. So it's the celestial mechanics, which defines the stability of a body at a specific location, is very complicated because it's a multi-body problem. Because all bodies might have smaller or larger attractions based on the gravitational pull.
Doctor, what kind of new discoveries can we anticipate from the mission, in your own view?
It is very difficult to predict a discovery, and that's why we do these missions. When we go into this mode, we want to know why this problem is so important. And the problem is so important because 99.8% of the mass of the solar system resides in the sun. And so essentially, if you think of the solar system, it is basically the sun, and 0.2% is just all these planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, etc., Jupiter, Earth, right? So the greatest thing to learn here is how is the sun evolving? How did it evolve? And if you find that trajectory of evolving, then how does it affect the ambience of the solar system? If the solar wind velocity is supposed to go up, then will it have an effect on temperatures on Earth, for example? So it's not quite direct that you can predict that this will be the result, but these are the directions that are possible. And so because this problem is so interesting and large for the solar system, there should be a very interesting mission.
Doctor, finally, and I know I interrupted your response to why there are so many missions, or there are so many space exploration missions around the world happening at the same time. But in your own view, a lot of focus has been on solar flares. What are they?
Right.
What dangers do they pose to Earth? And how can Aditya L1 help in understanding them? Briefly.
Right. Solar flares are like storms on the surface of the sun. And so they can cause electromagnetic events, which can disrupt many things, but maybe satellite communications. So I don't think it is very directly, able to predict or, say this is the discovery which will come through and this would help directly in so-and-so application. See, we are in this discovery phase still. We are still trying to understand the sun. The sun is a mystery which we are trying to unravel. And that is why there are so many missions there, because we still don't know a lot of things. And the reason it is so important is all the mass of the solar system is locked up in the sun. And so I think it's a very difficult thing to predict, per se.
It is a very difficult thing to predict. We are just under 3 hours away from the launch of Aditya L1 to the sun. I've been talking to Dr. Amitabh Ghosh. He's a scientist at NASA. Doctor, I will see you later, and thank you very much for talking to WION World is One.
Absolutely. Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.